Welcome to Who's That Pokemon, the most in-depth Pokemon anime rewatch podcast on the entire internet. If you didn't know, this is a retrospective look back on the Pokemon anime series, episode by episode from the very beginning. This show has been airing for over 20 years now and has over 1,000 episodes, yet it seems to get neglected by Pokemon fans, so I thought it was about time it got a proper, in-depth and passionate podcast entirely dedicated to it. Today's episode is episode 8 of the Indigo League season, titled The Path to the Pokemon League. The Japanese title for this episode is The Road to the Pokemon League. This episode first aired on May 20, 1997 in Japan, and in the United States on September 17, 1998. On this day in Pokemon history for the Japanese air date, we've got nothing of note, which seems to be a bit of a trend building here. But on this day in Pokemon history for the American air date, we actually had... on this very day where this episode, the 8th episode, aired in the United States, the Battle of the Badge would be airing in Japan. This is the episode that sees Ash collect his 8th gym badge, which just goes to show how far apart the Japanese and the American airings are at the moment, but they do close the gap quite a bit eventually. So much so that these days, I think it usually hovers around 50 to 80 days in between Japanese and American airings. But yeah, back then, Japanese had a huge head start, and yeah, they're basically almost onto the Pokemon League at this point. The screenplay for this episode was written by Atsuhiro Tomioka. Previously, he wrote Ash Catches a Pokemon and Clefairy and the Moonstone, and with this episode, Tomioka had officially written the most episodes of the show, surpassing Takeshi Shudo, who wrote the first 2 episodes. Shudo is going to end up tying him next episode, though, so... it's not a very long reign at the top here for Tomioka. But yeah, it is interesting that he has written the most episodes at the moment, as of the 8th episode. So this episode, there are no recurring human debuts and no Pokemon debuts, which, believe it or not, this is actually the first episode where we haven't seen any new Pokemon. So we've truly come to a filler episode here. We don't even get to see... new Pokemon in this episode. We've also got the Who's That Pokemon for this episode is none other than Sandshrew in honor of AJ's Sandshrew. So let's now get into the episode summary and discussion. Ash, Misty and Brock are on their way to Vermilion City. Along the way, Ash has a battle with another trainer, and Pidgeotto defeats a Rattata, securing his 10th victory. The trainer admires Ash's 2 badges, leading Misty to muse that giving Ash the badge may have been a mistake. The trainer points Ash to an unofficial gym where a strong trainer named AJ, who has purportedly never lost a match, trains savage Pokemon. So, in that little snippet there, we've got a few things to talk about. When Ash, Misty, and Brock are just walking along, Brock mentions that he's heard that there's a great gym in Vermilion City, and Ash acts pretty shocked at this news, even though Misty told him in the last episode that there was a gym, and she was kind of begging Ash to go to Vermilion instead of Cerulean because she didn't want her private life coming out to Ash and Brock. So yeah, it's a little weird that he's kind of shocked that there's a gym there when you knew about it. You just didn't want to go to it at that time. We get the opening title card here, and what they would do in these earlier episodes is if it mentioned Pokemon in the title, they would use the Pokemon logo for the dub title card. I don't believe they did it in Japan. I could be wrong on that. But yeah, they use the Pokemon logo here, and it just looks horrendous in the title card. It's really like low res. It's poorly kind of clipped out. Yeah, it does not look good at all, and I don't remember it ever looking this bad, so maybe it's to do with the version that Netflix has been given, because I feel like I've watched this on my DVD before, and it never looked that bad, or maybe I just never noticed it because who's paying that much attention to the title cards? I also thought that it's an extremely anticlimactic way to show Ash's very first on-screen victory here, just randomly cut to him beating a Rattata, like, right at the end of the battle. I would have much preferred to actually, like, at least see it for a little bit longer. And we'll get to it a bit later on, but there are a few moments of, like, padding out time in this episode. So it would have been nice if we actually got him having a proper battle here with this random trainer. Bit of trivia about this though. This is the first time we see Ash legitimately win a battle properly. All of the other on-screen battles so far have ended in dubious results or a loss for Ash. However, we're still yet to see a start-to-finish win from him. Very interesting that we're 8 episodes in and we haven't actually seen Ash have a battle from start to finish and get the win. And we've got an error here before we move on. When Ash knocks out the young trainer's Rattata at the start of the episode, the trainer calls its name out in dismay, but accidentally calls it Rat-Attack, its prototype name from Red and Green. So a little bit of a probably just a misspeak. I don't know if they would have been referring to it as that prototype name, but yeah, it's probably something that just didn't get picked up on and got overlooked. So the sign outside of AJ's gym indicates that the gym is unlicensed by the Pokemon League and it has a record of 98 wins to 0 losses. As Misty insults Ash, AJ walks up and challenges him to a battle. AJ snaps a whip, making Ash jump. He says that he plans to start competing for badges after his 100th consecutive win. Ash smugly tells him that he has 10 wins and 2 gym badges, at which point AJ insults the gyms, angering Misty and Brock. AJ calls out his Sandshrew to battle against Ash's Pokemon. Misty reminds Ash that Pikachu's electricity is useless against the ground Pokemon, but Ash rejects her advice. He then summons Pidgeotto to battle Sandshrew. Brock notes that a flying Pokemon should have the advantage. However, Sandshrew rolls itself into a ball and hurls itself into the air, which strikes and eliminates Pidgeotto from the battle.
Wow!
Now this is not too shabby at all.
What's in the backpack?
The wild Pokemon that I just caught. There's a whole bunch more in the tent, and then some.
Hey, can I see them after the match?
If you want.
We've got to talk about AJ here, obviously, first time we see him in the episode. And he's got a bit of a weird design. He's a very 90s design. It looks like he's the kind of shirt he has on and the green hair. It just gives off a real 90s sort of vibe here for AJ. But I think it really clashes with the sort of Bill Clinton-esque voice that he has. I think that's the best way I can describe it. It just, I don't know, it doesn't really fit his design. And when he started speaking, I'd kind of forgotten what AJ sounds like. I was like, oh, I'm not sure if this goes together very smoothly. AJ is actually voiced by Jimmy Zoppi, aka Carter Cathcart. We've encountered him previously in his roles as Gary Oak and Samurai, so we've already seen that Carter, or Jimmy, whatever you want to refer to him as, is a go-to guy for sort of characters of the day. He's got 2 of them so far. I really do appreciate the kind of preparation by AJ here. I think winning 100 battles in a row before going off to challenge like your gyms is a pretty cool strategy. That seems like something, you know, some kind of really like logical thing that you wouldn't expect from the anime, but would happen sort of in the video games. You know, people would like really grind like super hard early on to make things a bit easier. And I do like it because it's, I don't know, it's a little bit of a logical thinking there. Why would you just sort of start your journey like Ash did, have no Pokemon battles, and then like in your first handful of battles you're going to battle a gym leader whose job is literally to win battles. So yeah, I did enjoy that little bit, that kind of twist to AJ's character. So here, Ash's nose extends kind of like Pinocchio, when Pinocchio would lie, when bragging about his badges to AJ. This is actually a reference to the Japanese saying Tengu ni naru, which is used to describe a person getting a swollen head. However, this doesn't really work in the American dub, as most people would probably associate this with lying, a la Pinocchio, as I mentioned, which it makes no sense in the context it's used in. And when I was just watching the episode before I kind of looked up some extra info on the episode, I was kind of confused by it. I'm like, why is his nose getting big? He didn't tell a lie. He did win those gym badges. I mean, and then I was like, oh, I guess maybe they're doing it because, like, oh, he won them in very dubious circumstances. So, yeah, it kind of can work if you think of it that way. But for the most part, I thought it was just, a little bit awkward. I've got a dub change here, and it's not surprising. The sign over the gym is heavily edited because there's a bunch of text. The text all gets translated. The background actually changes from plain white to a grey that fades into white. The numbers are made into a dot matrix format, where the original was in a 7-segment LED format, and the number of losses is actually added to it. So they did a lot of dub changing on that sign, which is fair enough. The sign actually gets shown quite a bit in this episode, so it makes sense that they probably wanted to touch it up. So Ash then calls out Butterfree. Ash orders a stun spore attack, but AJ cracks his whip and Sandshrew digs underground, avoiding it. It bursts out of the ground, eliminating Butterfree from battle. Although Ash wants Pikachu to fight, Pikachu grabs hold of the edge of the field and refuses to go, finally shocking Ash. When all this is happening, Team Rocket is spying on the match from a nearby tree. They decide they wanted to steal AJ's Sandshrew, refusing to believe that anyone's Pokemon could be so strong. Ash accuses AJ of cheating and demands a rematch at another location, but AJ tells him to quit whining.
Pikachu, you've got to help your friends!
Nice work.
So I think we're starting to see some cooler battles here in the show. If it's anything to go from on this episode and last episode, then not exactly the most complex things in the world. And people who've continued watching the anime on from this generation, they'll know that battles get a lot more complex and a lot more entertaining. But they've got a lot more going on here than they did in the first episodes. I think they've sort of got their feet under them now, and they're happy to kind of sort of stretch their legs a little bit. I did enjoy kind of like the stuff in the battle where it's like AJ's Sandshrew going to dig to dodge the stun spore, that sort of thing. It's sort of building off of the gym battle last episode with Misty, where Misty would send her Staryu to dive underwater to avoid Butterfree. So it's definitely looking up so far compared to, like sort of the challenge of the samurai battle or the showdown in Pewter City battle, which they're not good at all. I'll just straight up say it. I won't even beat around the bush. They're not good at all. There's an error here though in the battle. Sandshrew hits Butterfree with Dig, despite the fact that Butterfree as a flying type is immune to a ground type move such as Dig. However, I don't mind this kind of liberty being taken with the anime. It makes sense in the game, which can't really be as complex with its battles due to like sort of the limitations of being a turn-based game. So it sort of makes sense to be like, all ground types can't hit flying types with ground type moves. But in the show, there's no reason why Sandshrew couldn't hit Butterfree with Dig, as long as it's like within reach. Sure, if like Butterfree flies up like a kilometer into the sky, Sandshrew shouldn't hit it. But I do think when in situations like this, I think it's perfectly fine. Maybe not having electric types affect like ground types the way Pikachu does so often. I think that's stretching it, but I do think when used like this, I think it's a nice little liberty that you can take in the anime. The English version of this episode is actually one of the few times a real animal gets mentioned in the show. Misty claims that AJ controls Sandshrew with the crack of his whip, just like a lion tamer. In the Japanese version, she simply remarks that it's amazing that AJ can control Sandshrew with the crack of his whip. So the 4Kids dubber's not really thinking it through there, the fact that lions don't exist in this world. Finally, Team Rocket, when they're spying on the battle, they really roast the hell out of AJ's clothing, and as I mentioned at the start, it's very 90s getup, and they're honestly not wrong for roasting him. It's not a great look, very of its time, and yeah, I think Team Rocket were very fashion forward then, realizing that this 90s style is not going to hold up. So shout out to Jesse and James for just, being fashionistas. Ash overhears AJ training his Pokemon, yelling angrily and cracking his whip. Ash intervenes to stop AJ from hurting his Pokemon, but AJ tells him to mind his own business. His Sandshrew is wearing a Strength Intensifier brace, which is actually invented by AJ himself. AJ then says he's tougher on Sandshrew than his other Pokemon because it was his very first. This kind of training area that AJ has is essentially a circus. Like, we've already had the mention of his whip, but it's literally like a circus, like people like diving into pools, walking around on fucking balls. It's legitimately like set up like a circus, and I don't know why they didn't lean into that heavily or like heavier. Why didn't they sort of give AJ maybe like a circus-ish design or something? Because I don't know, it seems weird to have his sort of workout area, I guess you could call it, designed so heavily like a circus. It's literally like in a circus tent, yet he doesn't really have any links to like circus stuff besides cracking a whip. There's a dub change here. A sign inside the tent saying "Fight, Work Harder" is changed to a picture of a Pokeball being hit with a whip. And I think we've got to sort of address AJ's attitude towards Pokemon here. I think that he's kind of straight up abusive to his Pokemon, and there's not nearly enough emphasis placed on this during the episode. Even Brock, who you'd think might mention something, he just like completely brushes it off. In later seasons with someone like Paul, I feel like they would look down on exactly this. Like this, if you put this in the Sinnoh arc, they wouldn't be kind to it. But here it's just brushed off. Like, I mean, I might be exaggerating too much, but it's at times AJ doesn't seem too far off the kind of attitude that Damien has. He's very hyper focused on his Pokemon being the absolute strongest and kind of doing anything possible to have the strongest Pokemon, which I know I just didn't like that they never even remotely address it. I will touch more on this later on in the episode though. Another dub change here. There's a scene where Pikachu's holding a pillow, and this is vastly different between the two versions, which is due to the fact that it's an untranslatable pun. The original version had Ash telling AJ that Sandshrew, known as sand in the Japanese version, is not a sandbag. Pikachu mistook this sandbag, the sandbag, for pillow, since zabuton, which is the word for pillow, and the Japanese word for sandbag sound similar. Ash then shouts at Pikachu for not taking him seriously. In the dubbed version, however, it's rewritten to have Ash mishear AJ thinking he said pacing, not passing, and thus gets sort of put off by Pikachu with its pillow. It just... I just don't like it. This whole pacing, passing, padding gag is completely lost in translation, and it just comes across as awkward and not even remotely funny. But I can't like fault him too much, because how the hell were 4Kids going to get out of this? This is such an untranslatable pun, and then Pikachu just like randomly has a pillow, and I just feel like there was no way to make this funny at all, or even just flow well. It's a whole like different thing to the Caterpie joke that gets made about 5 or so episodes ago, where that was an untranslatable pun, but there was sort of a clear way to work around it there, where the dubbers could actually create their own pun and it would still work perfectly with what was going on. But here it just works so awfully, and I'm not going to give 4Kids shit for it, because I honestly don't think anybody could have done much better. Ash is appalled at AJ's training methods, and he asserts that a great Pokemon trainer should make friends with his Pokemon. He asks for Brock's input, but Brock only wants to know what kind of food AJ is using. AJ, like Brock, mixes his own food with a secret recipe. Pikachu attempts to pick up one of Sandshrew's dumbbells, but falls back under the weight, while Sandshrew does rapid exercises. Meanwhile, Team Rocket is crouched behind AJ's tent preparing for their attempted heist, and begin discussing if they need to change up their motto. After the training, AJ's Pokemon are all exhausted. AJ insults Pikachu, and Ash takes a swing at him, causing them both to fall into the pool. Pikachu tries on the Strength Intensifier, but it works poorly and pulls him into a ball. Sandshrew then makes fun of Pikachu and rolls itself into a ball as well.
In this gym, we live by the rule, no pain, no gain. But judging by your little stuffed Pikachu over there, you don't follow any rules.
It's not a stuffed Pikachu. Take it back. Hey, did you hear me? I said take it back.
Don't, Ash!
You don't win badges for being buddy-buddy with a Pokemon!
Knock it off, you two!
Isn't there a rule against splashing in the pool?
We've got to address sort of the Team Rocket section here. It adds absolutely nothing to the episode except for padding the runtime out. They literally just discuss whether they should have a different motto and if they should like add in a dance. And while this kind of sounds funny on paper, it doesn't hit, it doesn't land, and honestly, I hated it. It's just not needed. Like I said earlier, you could replace this 30 seconds with Ash actually having a bit of a proper battle with the Rattata. Instead, we get like a 5-second thing of Ash winning his first ever battle on screen, but we get a bunch of time dedicated to Team Rocket not even doing anything. Like, they're behind AJ's tent, but they're not really like scheming or plotting or planning anything of note that's gonna come into play when they actually like go after the Pokemon inside the tent. So I didn't like it at all, and I really think it could have been cut in order to have something of a lot more substance. We've also got Ash trying to punch AJ in the face here, and just something I've noticed is that a lot of characters resort to physical violence in these early episodes. Off the top of my head, besides this, we've got Seymour in the Clefairy and the Moonstone episode. He tries to punch Team Rocket, and Ash does the same thing in, I believe, Ash catches a Pokemon. He has a swing at Team Rocket, so it's just a weird quirk here. I don't remember later on so many punching attempts happening, but yeah, here it's happened at least 3 times in the first 8 episodes, which again, that's pretty interesting that they didn't try and sort of edit around it. I guess it probably would have been pretty hard in all of those cases, but they do edit out Misty slapping Ash, which I can understand that, but I mean, Ash throwing a punch really for no justified reason in most cases. Well, I mean, I guess maybe Team Rocket cases are justified, but here it's not justified at all, and they just keep it in like it's nothing. So, just an interesting little thing there. So, Team Rocket rolls inside the tent. They're disguised inside of a rubber ball, and they intend to steal Pikachu, but they instead grab Sandshrew, mistaking it for Pikachu because they're both right up into balls at the moment. After AJ ends the rest break for his Pokemon, he realizes that Sandshrew is missing. He releases Pikachu from the harness, but Pikachu doesn't know where Sandshrew is either. Ash suggests that it ran away because it saw that Pikachu was treated better. AJ is extremely insulted at this, insisting Sandshrew would not have run away after all they had been through together. He sends his other Pokemon to look for Sandshrew, but Ash tries to convince AJ's Pokemon to leave with him. Despite the way AJ has treated them, they ignore Ash. Meanwhile, while arguing over who's going to carry the bag filled with Sandshrew, Team Rocket is then startled when a Sandshrew flies out instead of a Pikachu. Meowth bites Sandshrew's tail, and Sandshrew burrows underground in pain. While Ash and AJ are still arguing, Sandshrew bursts out of the ground next to him, dragging Meowth along with it. Seeing how happy AJ and Sandshrew are to be back together, Ash, Misty, and Brock realize how deeply AJ cares for his Pokemon. I thought it was interesting here how AJ talks about having a bunch of Pokemon and catching even more when we see him at the start of the episode. Yet when we kind of see like everybody that's training here, there's only his Sandshrew, a Beedrill, a Butterfree, and literally 3 Rattata, and that's it. I do like that he only has Pokemon available on the early routes in the games though, because it makes a lot of sense considering AJ hasn't set off on a journey yet, so he shouldn't have Pokemon that aren't around this part. I think it's a nice little nod to the games. I think the writers did their homework there. However, it is a little bit silly that they're building this AJ guy up as some kind of super duper Pokemon expert, and he's like claiming about how he's caught all these Pokemon, yet he has like 4 unique Pokemon, and he says he caught more at the start of the episode. Yeah, we never see them. It's just a little bit awkward if you think about it for too long. They do show here that the Pokemon, I guess, kind of like it with AJ, but I think they're still being treated horribly. They are pushed to the absolute brink. You see it in this section here. AJ is training them like super hard. He's super harsh on them, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But then they finish, they're absolutely exhausted. They're literally laying on the ground, like just spread out to try and recoup some sort of energy. But he gives them like a tiny ass break and then immediately forces them to get back into it, which, I don't know, it's like you can have them say that they like it, but the conditions just aren't great. Like he stops just short of like beating his Pokemon. He's cracking whips, which I feel like that is looked down upon. I feel like that's looked down upon in like animal sort of cruelty circles. So it just, in general, it feels like there's some sort of major Stockholm syndrome going on, and AJ is just, not a great treater of Pokemon. So surrounded by angry Pokemon and their trainers, Meowth tries to figure a way out of his situation when Jesse and James begin their standard motto. Jesse tells AJ that taking his Sandshrew was a mistake. James calls it second rate, earning AJ's ire. He challenges them to a battle, and this ends up going outside back to the field where Ash and AJ originally battled. Sandshrew avoids Coughing's sludge and Ekans' wrap attacks and takes him out. He then defeats Meowth, who tries to bite Sandshrew's armoured skin. Team Rocket flees after Sandshrew uses its Fisher attack. As this is AJ's 100th win, he and his Pokemon now leave to begin earning badges. Like Ash, he too wants to be the world's greatest Pokemon master. They part as friendly rivals, agreeing to meet in the future at one of the League competitions.
Sandshrew and I have our own path that we must follow.
Someday we'll meet again at the big Pokemon League competition.
Okay, but next time you better be in shape, because I only want to beat expert trainers.
That's a deal.
So long!
This is actually the first time a one-hit KO move is seen in the anime. Obviously, Sandshrew using Fisher here. And it's pretty insane. Sandshrew literally splits the earth in half here, which, coming from such a little Pokemon, it just looks so insane that it literally opens up a huge, massive hole in the ground from this little tiny Sandshrew that, honestly, is kind of cute. So, it shocked me when that was how he kind of finally dispatched Team Rocket. I do think it really sucks that they never brought back AJ for the Pokemon League. They part, and they do discuss the Pokemon League and like seeing each other again quite a bit. And just in general, there's a lot of allusion to AJ sort of coming back in the future. We've got I've got a quote from Brock here. He says to Ash, "Looks like you found another rival." And then AJ is never to be seen again. Like, I don't know why they just dropped him sort of like that. I think this is something they do a lot better in later seasons. A character like AJ would be introduced and then be a recurring character rather than a once-off thing if this was basically anything from Hoenn onwards. However, it's early on and they're kind of just flying by the seat of their pants. It would have been so much better. I think the Indigo League is probably by far the worst. I think Johto is pretty average too, and I think it's mostly because we get there and Ash doesn't really know basically anybody prior to battling in it. There's basically Gary and that's it. I think the Johto Silver Conference is the same, that the only person he met before battling in it is Gary. I don't think Casey battles at the Pokemon League from memory. But in later regions, you get people who've been built up throughout the show also appearing there. Whereas here, you've just got random people, and then I guess Richie is like one of the most built up characters, and we literally meet him at the Pokemon League. So it would have been cool if someone like an AJ, like a Damien even, came back in the Pokemon League instead of like, oh, Ash is going to face off against random trainers and then have like a random person win the league. It's just pretty anticlimactic again, using that word a couple times throughout this episode. A bit of trivia here. This episode is the last in which Ted Lewis voices James, as well as obviously Eric Stewart's first episode voicing James. He takes over the role when James summons Coughing in battle. So not really a proper episode yet for Eric Stewart as the voice of James, but you know, it's still counts as his first episode. This was actually because Ted Lewis left for a time to do theatre, so didn't really have as much time to voice James, who is going to be appearing in most episodes, so they palmed it off to Eric Stewart. And finally, one small dub change. At the end of the episode, a 5-second panning shot of the battlefield is cut by 3 seconds and replaced by a 3-second clip from earlier in the episode. So that's it for the actual episode. What did I think? Much like many of these first episodes, I think this is a solid but not spectacular episode. It's not too bad for filler, but you never really feel like this episode has just been plonked here to drag out the season, despite nothing of note happening except kind of a couple of Team Rocket's Pokemon being revealed to know new moves. So in that aspect, I do think this is kind of on the better end of the scale of episodes so far. However, I have a few negatives, as you've probably heard me mention throughout this episode. I feel like they gloss over AJ's training methods just way too much. They don't even criticize it slightly. In fact, Ash, who's the only person in this whole episode who dares to call AJ's methods out, he's made to look wrong in every aspect, which that is a clear indicator that the show is trying to tell us that no, AJ's methods are fine. This is a fine method of training, which, yeah, I didn't like at all. I would have liked a more nuanced take on this. There should have been something that addressed the fact that his Pokemon are pretty close to being abused. Like, it's pushing the boundaries. Other than the sort of short section of the episode where it's sort of all like, look, my Pokemon love it and they love me. Like, it's cool that they like you, but I don't know, it's pretty iffy what you're doing to your Pokemon. It also does lose some points, too, for the completely useless Team Rocket scene where they discuss making up a dance for about 30 seconds. As I said, it adds nothing to the plot and isn't really that funny. It's just obviously there to fill time, and yeah, I didn't like it. Probably the Team Rocket moment I've liked the least so far since their debut. There's also a couple of moments that I also have mentioned that get lost in translation in the dub, which I can't ding too much because, I mean, that's not there in the Japanese airing, and I can't really ding 4Kids for it because they were really hard to properly translate into English. So no, I'm not really going to ding points for the episode because of that. But yeah, it's just something really to notice about the quality of the episode. And I guess it does kind of overall affect the enjoyment you get from watching it. Overall, it's not bad and definitely more than passable for a filler episode. I think I have to give it a thumbs up for the very first filler episode of the Pokemon anime. So a very brief recap of major events that happen here. It's Meowth is revealed to know Bite, Jesse's Ekans is revealed to know Rap, and Ash wins his first on-screen battle. So not a whole lot happening here. I guess the very brief on-screen battle win for Ash technically makes this not filler, but it's so brief it might as well have happened off-screen. So let's take a look at Ash Ketchum's win-loss record. We haven't had a whole lot to update on in the first 8 episodes. However, technically, we have his record improving to 1 win and 2 losses, if we only count battles we legitimately see with our own eyes. However, they do explicitly tell us that Ash has won 10 battles, so we could make his record 10 wins and 2 losses. It does feel a bit dirty making this his record, though. So I think I'm going to just keep referring to his actual on-screen wins and losses that we see. It makes things too muddy if we're going to count off-screen things. So I think it's more important if we count the ones that we see. But yeah, 1 win, 2 losses. The 1 win obviously coming in this episode, and the 2 losses being once against Brock as a forfeit, and then his loss to AJ here. So not a great start for Ash Ketchum on his road to being a Pokemon Master. It'll be interesting to see if it actually ever turns around in the future. I don't recall there being a whole lot of battling in this saga of the anime, so it might actually end pretty damn poor. But now it's time for some more trivia. This is the very first episode of the anime to not be explicitly set within a location from the games. Every location we've seen so far has been basically one of the towns or either Mount Moon or Viridian Forest. So this is the first time we ever get sort of a nondescript location that's sort of just on the road in between 2 major locations. Parts of this episode were remade in the 20th movie, I Choose You, and this might be my favourite bit of trivia, because I'd kind of forgotten that they did this. In Pokemon Yellow, there is a youngster on Route 9. This trainer solely uses a level 24 Sandshrew that has the move Fisher, much like AJ's Sandshrew in the anime. After the player wins the battle, he says, "I'll restart my 100 win streak with Sandshrew," a reference to the fact that AJ won 100 battles in this episode. In Pokemon Red and Blue, this trainer is just a junior trainer and has a Growlithe and a Charmander and says, "Keep walking," after being defeated. So I like that. Unfortunately, Pokemon Yellow, when it came out, I don't think there was enough references to the anime. They're few and far between. But if Pokemon Yellow had more references to the anime, like this kind of subtle references, I would have I think I would look back on it more fondly, and I think I would appreciate it more as a third version in the Pokemon series. Like, let's go Pikachu and Eevee added in Misty's sisters being in the gym, which you would have thought something like that would have been done in Yellow originally, but they didn't. But they added in AJ, which is just so random. But with all that trivia said and done, it's time for Pokemail. Now, the question of the episode this week I want to ask all of you is, what's your personal opinion on AJ's training style? I've had a pretty staunch opinion on this myself, and I want to find out what you guys think. I obviously am kind of pushing for the fact that it's borderline abusive. I don't completely hate the style. I just think the conversation surrounding it in the episode just isn't as nuanced as I wanted it to be, and I wanted some sort of acknowledgement that AJ is definitely pushing the boundary of what's acceptable for Pokemon training, and I didn't get that. But I want to find out what you guys think of AJ and his training style. So head on over to the YouTube video for this episode and pop into the comment section below and respond. I'll always love hearing what you guys think about different aspects of the anime. But that's about it for this episode. Thanks for listening to Who's That Pokemon. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're not subscribed to the podcast already, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and YouTube, as I mentioned. Pretty much any podcast service out there except Google Play. You can also find the show on Twitter at Who's That PKMM Pod to keep up with the latest updates for the show. And I'm on Twitter as @SauceMarlow. That's all for this episode. I hope you join me again next time as I take a look back at the School of Hard Knocks, which also comes pretty close to being a filler episode, although we do learn some interesting background info on Team Rocket.